we're going to talk to you about the circular bioeconomy and how we can use our rubbish as a resource to replace things like fossil fuels and chemicals and stuff that we use. So, I don't know what Leo's doing. Technology. So I'm Dr. Dhivya Puri.
I'm Alba Serna-Maza.
And I'm Vaurs, and as you may have noticed, we've got a lot of different accents because we come from a lot of different places. We all joined together in Vaurs, and we're gonna introduce ourselves right now.
I come from a region from Spain called Castilla y León, which means castles and legends. So we have many castles, as the name says, and many other beautiful stuff. But don't worry, so far that's the only legend I've seen around, so you can go, you don't need to be scared.
Right, so I'm from France, Clermont-Ferrand, which is in Auvergne. It's a small city, very famous for its cathedral, revolving water. It's a machine factory, and because we have a whole range of very delicious cheese.
So I'm Dhivya, I'm from Australia, actually from Melbourne. So Melbourne's a really nice city. There's lots of nightlife, cosmopolitan, there's beaches, there's forests, lots of sporting events. So yeah, you think, okay, why did I leave? Well, at the moment I'm not going back because of the current Prime Minister probably, but so how did we end up researching the bioeconomy? So I studied chemical engineering and genetics during my undergraduate degree, and then I did a research project at the end, which I really loved, and I thought, okay, I want to do research and development. And then I traveled to different countries and worked in Denmark, and the UK, and Australia, and then I ended up here and at Southampton, and I started working, and then they offered me a PhD, so I took it, and so I did my PhD here.
During my chemical engineering degree, I also did 2 research projects to treat swine manure by anaerobic processes as well as advanced oxidation processes. And afterwards, I decided to come to Southampton to do the PhD on anaerobic process, and we will explain this later on.
Because I'm much younger than these 2 ladies, I haven't done anything of my life. So I finished my degrees, and I've done my internship in Southampton University, and they offered me a PhD, and I say, well, why not? So I accept this PhD, and I'm very happy to be here.
So first we're going to start, so now you can use your zappers. So we're going to ask you, before we tell you anything, what you think this circular economy means. Right, so is it A, no net gain of profit anywhere as all goods and services are traded in a loop? Is it B, all goods are recycled and reused in a loop, so there's no loss of resources? Or C, all goods end up producing energy at the end of their lifespan? So everybody choose A, B, C. We've got about 15 seconds.
That's over.
Have you pressed it?
Yeah, it's not working. It's not working. That's great, then.
It's working.
You just tried it.
Well, let's see anyway.
No, nothing's working. Wait. Sorry, technical glitches.
Now I'm
Alright, okay, technology is over. So who wanted to say A? Put your hands up, please.
Oh, now it's working.
It's working. No. 2 seconds now, right now.
Come on.
Over.
Ready? Has everybody done it?
Yeah.
Wow.
So B, all goods are recycled and reused in a loop. So yes, you are correct. That's what it means. So, okay. Next, we've got another question. So in cities where we want to continue developing, but we're using all our resources and getting very populated, what 2 issues do you think need to be addressed so that we can continue development, but also ensure that we've got resources so that we can live comfortably? So should we be looking at energy and waste? Should we be looking at food and housing, food and GDP, or in education and energy?
Anyway, that's all right.
50, okay.
52, 53, up.
Okay, so many of you are right. As population increase, it does also resources and energy use as well as waste production. And in order to, we can also use the waste that is placed in landfills to produce energy, and if we could also reclaim those lands to better use, such as food production or housing, and reduce the environmental consequences, since there are many toxic material placed in there, although they shouldn't, because some people, they don't know that what can they put in the waste or what can they not put. And also we will reduce the greenhouse gases emission, since all the organic materials that are placed in there are degraded to produce carbon dioxide and methane. And we will reduce obviously all the odors that everything involves. So if we reduce our waste as well as we segregate it in order to use these different fractions, this is essential to have an eco-friendly waste management system. If we look at the energy problem, from 1990 to 2008, there was an increase in population of 27%, as well as an increase in average energy use of 10%. That's a massive amount of energy. That if we look at where it's coming from, this energy, we can see that only 13% of this energy is coming from renewable energy, being 2% of nuclear energy, and the rest coming from coal, gas, and oil, which are fossil fuels, totally non-renewable, because it takes millions of years to be generated by the composition of varied organisms. And we need to find other resources of energy in order to cover that energy gap that we need to, because we still need to use our devices.
So fossil fuels, actually, they're not just used to make energy. We also use them to make lots of different things. So we use fossil fuels to make plastics, chemicals, fuels, medicines, cosmetics, fabrics, and lubricants. So I was just reading, actually, there's a lot of there's a lot of foundations that have chemicals that come from fossil fuels. So, you know, makeup foundations. So actually, we use it in a lot of different products.
So yeah, just an idea of the energy we can produce by using our waste. So in 2012, if all of our waste were burned in incineration, we could have produced 4.3 gigawatts of electricity, which is equivalent to 8 nuclear reactors and can power about 1 million Scottish household for 1 year.
But how can we do it?
Yeah, that's me. How can we draw even more value from waste? Well, if we take this picture, so that's a landfill, apparently not really anything interesting on it. But actually, if you look deeper, you can find, for example, white goods. What can you do with that? So if you decontaminate it, you avoid all of the greenhouse emission that participate to the global warming, and you can actually recover a lot of different materials such as copper and iron, and they're quite valuable. Same with your old mobile phone. They contain a lot of precious metal and heavy metal, such as gold, platinum, or silver. And actually, if you look at the recent trade, the price crazily increased over the years. So you can reduce the amount of you can recover this metal that can be really good for the environment. But it contains also a lot of very easy recoverable material. So if, for example, we've got plastic bottle here, so you can obviously create new plastic bottles. Because there is some really cool innovative projects. For example, this one is a partnership between Ford and Coca-Cola, and they actually make a seat car from waste bottle. Only Coca-Cola, unfortunately. If you look at that's the cans. So with cans, you can obviously produce new cans, so you can recover the aluminium. And the aluminium is one of the most energy demanding material to produce. So that's great. We can also use for different purposes, such as making ashtray from Coca-Cola cans again. On glass bottles, so at this moment in the UK, the policy is we take the glass, we just put it in a furnace at very high temperature to melt it and we create new glass. That can, but you can also use that in brick construction to build a new house. But that's actually the UK model, and it's not the clever way, the most clever way to do it. For example, if we take the German model, you can see all of the beer bottles have exactly the same size. So what they do, they just collect everything and wash it and reuse again. So you don't have to reach like crazy high temperature. So that's much more eco-friendly. But that also contains a lot of potential energy in landfill. For example, you can, from waste paper, produce bioethanol. from food waste you can produce biogas, and from all of the garden waste or agriculture waste you can burn it on creating heat and electricity. Now a small look at the composition of municipal solid waste in England. So as you can see, it's mostly paper, food, but you've got a lot of other organic waste, and that constitute what we call biomass, which has a great energy content and potential. And all of the other things are metal that can be really easily recovered and recycled.
So, like most of you guessed at the start, the circular economy is this closed loop cycle where we're using all our resources continuously. So we're trying to mimic nature's cycle where a plant takes up carbon dioxide, it grows, it's used and nutrients go back into the land, and it's sort of circular and it keeps growing and it's sustainable. So a circular economy, the UK or the government, they're trying to roll out this concept. And so say you had a washing machine and you've got precious metals in your washing machine, you would lease it from the manufacturer and they would keep hold of it. So when you decided you finished with your washing machine, they would take it back, they would recover the metals and they would use it for another washing machine production. So that way we keep all the resources in our closed loop. So the circular bioeconomy is the same thing, but we want to use biomass or plants to basically replace fossil fuels, and then as we use them, we burn them to break carbon dioxide, which is taken up by the plants, or we use them to make chemicals, which are broken down and taken up by the plants that way, and so that way everything stays in the loop. And we want to achieve this thing called end of waste. So end of waste means when we can use our waste to produce everything that we use at the moment. So from plastics to fuels to chemicals to paints to just about anything. So we've got a short video here about the circular bioeconomy, which will explain it a little bit better.
This is Ben. He likes nature, plants and animals, the seaside, and fossils. Ben knows that we depend upon fossil fuels for all kinds of things. For energy, making plastics, textiles and chemicals, and even for producing food. Ben also knows that we might run out of fossil fuels because they are non-renewable, unsustainable resources. Plants, on the other hand, can be grown, harvested and used more efficiently. They are renewable, sustainable resources. Scientists are discovering how biological resources from our farms, forests, seas and organic waste can help us to make similar products to those we currently depend upon. These products from nature have created what we now call a bioeconomy, a circular economy, producing bio-based products that can often be replaced in a sustainable cycle. The bioeconomy will increasingly affect Ben's future by developing innovative and diverse products. For instance, did you know that spider silk has a potential to be used to make computer chips or fiber optic cable? Healthier foods, revolutionary medicines, greener energy and bio-based consumer goods will be made. Innovative technologies will create new employment opportunities, new industries, and sustainable economic growth. The bioeconomy starts here, by changing the way we think, creating a brighter future full of natural, bio-based solutions. Be part of the European bioeconomy.
So we are talking about biomass, and we need this in our biocycle. But what is this? This is really a heterogeneous material and complex. Everything that is coming from one's living organisms, such as plants and animals, and their waste into the environment. But mainly it's compounded by carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and hydrogen, arranged in the form of carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins. We can find complex carbohydrates in foods in starch, such as bread or pasta, as well as in plants in the form of cellulose. And we find simple carbohydrates in any sugar. We can also see lipids in fats, any kind, vegetal or animal, and proteins in the meat, in fish, in eggs, in legumes.
So where do this? So basically, all these bio-based chemicals and biofuels and stuff, how will they fit into our current economy or our cycle? So here we have a plant. So that plant takes in agricultural stuff, and we produce our food, we produce chemicals, we produce food, just as we do normally. Then that gets taken to the municipal, to everybody, and everybody uses that, and you produce waste, and you've got agricultural waste, and then that all goes into a second biorefinery that we have here. So this biorefinery takes in the crop residue, the municipal solid waste, and it will be used to produce the fuel, the power, the heat, chemicals, and everything. And then that will be used, the carbon dioxide will be let off if it's burnt, or nutrients will go back into the ground. That will then go back into the original biomass, and then that will close the cycle. But so, yes, we can make a lot of things out of this biomass, but we don't want to get rid of recycling because we want to keep all our resources, especially metals, inside this circular economy. So by the end of this lecture, we want you to be able to answer if you have an opinion on whether we should leave recycling to the public or whether we should do it at centralized facilities. But because, yeah, sorry. So let's just talk a little bit more about recycling in the UK. So at the moment, it's run by local authorities. So every region, every county has a different system. So there's no standard system. So it's quite confusing. You don't really know what you can recycle, what people will take, things like that. It's source segregated for the most part. So this is up to you guys. You've got separate bins at home that you take plastic, glass, paper, metals. And in some places, they take food waste as well. In cities, actually, it's quite poor. The recycling rates are less than 30%. In some cities, it's only about 17%. And then in rural areas, it's higher at 70%. But it's much harder to go and collect this stuff from the countryside because there's a lot less people, so it costs a lot more energy to go and collect it. And Southampton, actually, do you guys all live in Southampton or around? Oh, no. Okay, doesn't matter. But in Southampton, we have less source segregation because we have an incineration plant. So if you've ever seen across the solid water, there's a giant alien-looking spaceship. It's like an upside-down silver bowl, and that's actually an incinerator. So most of our waste is going for incineration, and that's producing energy for us. So we've got a few more questions. You can get your zappers back. So just a sort of perceptions of what you think is happening with recycling. So in 2010, 23 million tons of household waste was generated in the UK. How much of that do you think was recycled, reused, or composted? So A, B, C, or D.
Okay.
Done? Okay, so you guys think it's either 2.3 or 9.4. So you're saying it's quite a low amount that was recycled, and you're correct. It was only 9.4 million that's recycled, but most of that was actually biomass that was composted. So that was taken up and used as mulch and stuff. But that means that 13.6 million tons we're actually sending to landfill or putting overseas. And that's actually equivalent to if you filled all the double-story houses in Hampshire with waste. That's how much waste we're putting in the ground. It's a massive amount. And our recycling rates in the UK are much lower than other countries like Germany or Austria, which are sort of upwards of 70%. So in 2012, 7.9 million tons of paper was recovered. How much do you think was exported overseas? There's a few people who haven't done it.
Look up.
Yeah, so you guys have no idea.
No, the big.
Huh?
I'm there.
Yeah, so you think it's either, it's a bit of a mix. But actually, we're exporting 57% of the paper that we recover. So that's all going to, mostly to China and places, or to the Netherlands. And that's a huge biomass resource that we're losing that we could be using. Okay, last question. So 8.3 million tons of food waste is generated by households each year. So how much do you think of that is totally avoidable? So that means that it's, you didn't have to buy it, or it's been lying in a fridge, it's been out of date. Yeah. actually. So about 63% of the food waste that we have, guys. Yeah, so 63% of the food waste that we have is totally avoidable, and that's really up to us and you guys, because we're buying this stuff, we're not eating it. So really you have to be thinking when you're going shopping or your parents are going shopping, do we really need to buy that? Are we going to eat it? Is it worth, doing that?
So we would like to increase this percentage of recycling. How can we do this? If we can take away the segregation out of the public and do it in a facility, centralized facility, by a process called mechanical separation. In this process, the waste arrives to the plant, the bag is open, and the waste is chopped into small pieces, and then different technologies are applied based on different properties of the waste that we want to segregate. These properties are size, shape, density, weight, magnetism, or electrical conductivity, but still we need manual sorting as a quality control. These processes, for example, we have the line of waste, and some technologies such as magnetism. We put a magnet at the top. Every ferrous material will be stick to the magnet and separated from the main line of waste. Or another example is the weight separation, where it's based on density. We put our waste in a line of water. In this way, everything that floats is separated by everything that sinks. We have a little video to show you how this works.
The waste is delivered to the plant by refuse trucks and tipped into the reception area. It is then loaded into the bag opener using a 360 grab. The material then travels up an incline conveyor to the pre-sort area, where any excessively oversized or heavy items are picked out. The material travels onto the trommel, which separates the waste into 3 different sizes: fines, mid-size, and overs. The fine material is transferred by conveyor to an inline magnet to remove any ferrous material. The remaining fines are then sorted using a flip-flop screen and air knife. The resulting fine fractions are sent for RDF and AD. Back at the trommel, the mid-size materials are transferred to the ballistic separator, which separates the waste into 2D, or flat items, and 3D, or rolling items. The 2D material goes through 4 optical separators, where it is sorted into 5 material streams: paper, card, clear film, coloured film, and RDF, or residues. All recovered materials then travel through a quality control cabin for a final manual inspection before dropping into their relevant sorting bays below. The 3D material from the ballistic separator passes onto a conveyor to an inline magnet which removes any ferrous material. The remaining 3D fraction continues under an eddy current separator, removing the non-ferrous material. Finally, the 3D material travels through 2 optical separators, which automatically remove wood and plastic bottles and then create a residual RDF fraction. This residual material from the 2D and 3D lines is transferred to the RDF baler, where it is baled and wrapped for export to Europe to generate electricity. Back at the trommel, the oversized material travels through the final section of the trommel and onto a picking line, where it is manually separated into wood, plastics, and cardboard. Across the MRF, the sorting bays fill with segregated materials, which are then pushed through by a loading shovel onto the baler feed conveyor. The materials are then baled and stored, ready for collection by reprocessors.
So by using these technologies, we can segregate 8 different streams. 2 of those are biomass that we can use in the biocycle, in the bioeconomy. These are paper and organics, and the rest are inerts that they should be recycled.
Well, just the last moment, just to tell you how advanced is the technology. Now we can, for example, separate newspaper per type just by looking at the fiber property. So you can have your Times, your Sun newspaper, so it has a great technology, but it has other context. So let's move on. So if you're a little bit lazy to sort everything, you can just put everything in an incinerator to produce energy, mostly electricity or heat. But if you do this segregation, that opens more doors, and you can produce biofuel, so important source of energy. So we've got biomethane, we've got biohydrogen, biodiesel, bioethanol. We can also produce biochemical and bioplastics. In this moment in the UK, it's about 1 million tons of waste that are produced every year. And if we go back 1 million that we export, sorry. And if we go back 6 years ago, actually nothing was exported and everything was stuck in landfill. But they realized, well, that's not really eco-friendly. And well, there's a landfill tax. So you pay to bring stuff in the landfill, and that increase of £8 every year. So at this moment, it's cheaper to send stuff overseas than actually put it in landfill. And well, we send it to Netherlands and China because they've got really high technological incineration. And we don't have a lot in the UK, and it's too expensive to build one, and it's actually cheaper to send stuff. But I mean, we pay Netherlands to pick our waste, and they get a lot of energy from that. So we should maybe think a little bit more about a future opportunity for our waste. So let's talk a little bit more of incineration. That's the one in Southampton, for a cool design. So there's a very old technology. The first one was built in Hamburg at the end of the 19th century. 850 degrees for 2 seconds at the incineration condition. And how it's great is because that helps you to avoid any contamination. For example, if we take the example of the mad cow crisis, like 15 or 20 years ago, that was great to avoid the germs to attack people and stuff, so all of the dead cows are burned. That's great, you kill all of the bacteria for sure. But you can also produce a lot of heat and electricity through a cogeneration unit, a CHP. In Europe at this moment is about 400 incinerators that are currently dealing with 20 to 25% of our municipal waste. And they provide electricity for 27 million people and heat for 30 million people. But, because there is a but, well, a lot of people don't really like incinerator because in the past they were not very efficient, so there was a lot of pollution, emission and stuff, and people were afraid, if you go to incineration, we're going to get disease. But actually, a very serious medical study found out that there was no correlation at all between incineration and specific disease or cancer. And that's mostly because most of the gases are neutralized, so they are not going out of the atmosphere, and you don't get any fines. And actually now they do technology with plasma where it's super clean and you don't release anything in the atmosphere. Now, it has been found to be actually more eco-friendly than paper recycling. So why? It's because when you recycle the paper, you can only do it 4 to 6 times, otherwise the fiber becomes too short. So if you want to do that, you have to build plants that are bigger and bigger, and use a lot of chemical to remove the ink, to remove the fillers and stuff. And that's very nasty chemicals, very polluting. When burning is great. You reduce also a lot the mass. So if you take 100 kilograms here, you've got only 1 kilogram of waste, so that's a really good reduction. And the ash are neutralized, and they can be used for other purposes, for example, mixing concrete.
But from now on, we are only going to talk about bio-based products. What can we do with our biomass in the bioeconomy? We can produce biomethane by anaerobic digestion. This is a process in which organic matter is degraded by microorganisms in absence of oxygen to produce biogas. This is formed by carbon dioxide and methane, which has a really high calorific value and can be used in a gas engine, and it can also be injected in the national gas grid as natural gas. It can also produce electricity and heat, and always that heat needs to be utilized to make the process profitable. Any kind of waste can be used in this process, from manure, sewage, food and crop waste. And also, we have a very nice video to explain this. At least the accent is kind of similar to mine. You will see.
Food waste arrives at the plant. It's pre-treated and any remaining packaging is removed. It's then fed into the digestion tank. Here the waste separates into the two main products. Firstly, there's methane, and rather than being released into our atmosphere, this gas is captured and used to power electricity generators. Over 90% of the electricity produced in this way is exported to the national grid, with the remainder being used by the plant itself. Alternatively, the methane can be cleaned up and used as a vehicle fuel or fed into the national gas supply for use by homes and businesses. There is also a very useful byproduct, heat. About a third of this is used to heat the AD plant itself, with the remainder often being used to warm local factories and other buildings, making the whole process almost self-sufficient in power and heat.
There's also an useful secondary product which comes from anaerobic digestion. This is a digest that sinks to the bottom of the tank, which is rich in nutrients and nitrogen, which can be used as a soil improver. And with the cost of fertilizer going up all the time, this is a great way of returning nutrients to the land.
But also we can produce other biochemicals from this process, because this process is a really long chain of reaction, and to produce methane we need to lead the reaction to go till the end. But we can recover as well hydrogen, stopping the reaction at any point as we can, as a fuel gas, or volatile fatty acids, which are main components to produce biodegradable plastics to replace the petrochemical plastics, or in other industries they can be used as well, in pharmaceuticals, food industry as flavoring or antimicrobial. Yeah. We also have the biofertilizer, as the video explained. This is a mixture of undegraded organics and microorganisms that can be applied on land because it has a really high nutrients value, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, that after pathogen control can be applied instead of chemical fertilizers that are really expensive now. Now we are going to explain some examples of this technology in real life. This is a factory in Netherlands. It's from Ben & Jerry, and it's called the Chunkinator. And they produce electricity using ice cream waves. Some example from UK is this Sainsbury and Cannock, that they produce the electricity to power the supermarket by the food waste produced in their own supermarket, since they have the policy of no waste to landfill. And this news just came last week, and it's the first bus powering biogas in UK. It runs from Bristol to Bath, and it's called the Poo bus. Because the biogas is produced by sewage and food waste. With the deposit, which is at the top, this is full of gas, and it can power the bus for 300 kilometers. But in Sweden, for example, they have all the public transport already running with biogas. Even trains. The first train was in 2005. The last example is the cow farm pack. You may know that cows are responsible for 25% of the methane emission to the environment, which is really bad for global warming. And someone thought that could be a good idea to collect this gas in a pack from the cow's rumen. And from a cow we can collect 300 liters of methane, and that amount could power a fridge for 24 hours.
It's very light gas, so the cow is not in pain.
Yeah. It has a tube.
So now we'll look at biodiesel. So biodiesel is a substitute for regular diesel, but it's a lot cleaner than regular diesel because it doesn't have as much of toxic compounds which make the toxic gases and stuff that diesel does. So biodiesel is not made within a bug as such. It's made from biologically derived oil, and that's why it's called biodiesel. So we can make it. There's this thing called first generation. So that's when we're using food crops to make fuel. So like rapeseed in England, you see a lot of these yellow fields, and that's rapeseed or oil crops. that can be collected. In Southeast Asia, they use palm oil, but then that's being really bad enough because they're endangering orangutan habitats and stuff, so it's not a very eco-friendly way to do it. Or you can also use second generation, which is using waste cooking oils and waste fats from McDonald's or something to make this biodiesel. So the biodiesel is made via a chemical reaction, so you collect the oil and then you react it with some alcohol, and then you get biodiesel and glycerol. And glycerol is a really good product to put into moisturizers or soaps and things. It's a good pharmaceutical product. So basically, there's no waste in this reaction. But also, there are bugs that have been genetically modified or engineered that will produce biodiesel by eating sugar. So they'll eat sugar and they'll spit out diesel, basically. Or there's algae as well, so pond scum. So we know that they'll eat carbon and sugar and stuff, and they'll produce oils inside them, and it's thought that maybe that can be used as a biodiesel substitute as well. So the case study I've got is called the London Fatberg. So last year, it must have been the year before actually, the London sewers became clogged with a mass of congealed fat and oil, basically because people were just chucking anything down the sinks, and it blocked all the sewers, it disrupted a lot of households and things. And so the Mayor of London's office thought, okay, what can we do about this? How can we solve this problem so it doesn't happen again? So they started collecting the waste oil and fat and putting it in and making biodiesel out of it. And they now power 120 buses on this B20 blend. So B20 means there's 20% biodiesel in the diesel mix. And it's a cost-effective way for them to reduce their CO2 emissions and be greener, like the city to be greener. And also, you can just put biodiesel into a normal diesel engine. You don't need to change your engine, so it is quite cost-effective.
Right, now the last energy you can make from waste is bioethanol. So why? Because in about 30, 50 years, we're going to run out of fossil fuels, so we have to really find a new alternative. So that can be done doing first generation bioethanol. It has a really great potential. So for example, we got sugarcane in Brazil. But there is always this competition between food and energy because producing energy from food crops, you use a lot of land and you cannot produce a lot of food and stuff. So a good alternative and solution can be to produce second generation bioethanol by basically using either agricultural waste, forest residues, or municipal solid waste. So a bit different, but actually they're quite similar because they're all lignocellulosic material. So what does it mean? That means they are made of cellulose, which is a long chain of glucose that you can find in your favorite candy or jelly bean. You've got hemicellulose, so it's a long chain of sugar, but it's much more complex and random. And actually there's no model to actually describe hemicellulose. Lignin, that's the thing glue everything together and make the rigidity to twist. And it's very difficult to degrade this thing and to hydrolyze it. And you've got a little bit of pectin. So now, how we produce bioethanol from this thing? So it's the same principle as producing wine. So there's a Gewürztraminer, which is delicious white wine from the north of France. I highly recommend it. So you take the grape, you press it to release the juice. The juice is full of sugar. And you do a process called fermentation, which is basically consists in the conversion of glucose to ethanol using yeast. So we do exactly the same thing. But wine is about 12%, and that's the same with bioethanol. And to be able to put it on your car to power your engine, you need to have a concentration about 98%. So all you use is a distillation column. It's a small lab model, and you basically play with the fact that ethanol has a much lower boiling temperature than water. Water is obviously 100 degrees when ethanol is 78. So you boil everything, the ethanol go here, you cool it down, and you've got your ethanol here, and the leftover is only water. So now how can we release this sugar? Well, if we take the example of newspaper, if you eat a newspaper, well, don't, it's not very sweet. So we have to find a way to release this sugar. So that can be done chemically, it's not really eco-friendly. That can be done mechanically, you get really good yield, but it costs you a lot of energy. Or you can do it biologically, and that's better. You use yeast or bacteria, great, but it takes ages. But you can use enzyme. The enzyme we use is cellulase, and that's much more eco-friendly. What does it do with this enzyme? So there's a long chain of cellulose, and it's actually like kind of a silver effect. So you cut it, you cut the link, and you basically release your glucose from your long chain of cellulose. So that's my case study. There's an American project in Texas. Yeah, I don't know the name of the, so it's not in Texas. And they use corn stover. They deal with about 700 tons a day, and they produce every year 25 million gallons of bioethanol, which is quite a lot.
So actually, besides these energy and fuels, we can also use bugs to make just about anything. So there's this field now called synthetic biology, and we can engineer bugs or yeast, so we can do genetic modification, so that they basically make anything that we want, from plastics to chemicals to a whole variety of chemical building blocks. And a chemical building block is something where you start off with this base chemical, it goes through a series of reactions, and it ends up as the complex molecules that we see in everyday products. So here I've got a couple of examples. So this company, Amyris, they've made a bug and they've modified it so that it can produce jet fuel. So this compound farnesene. And what they do is they've combined with this French oil company, Total, and now they're powering these planes on this biologically derived jet fuel. But at the moment, they're feeding their bugs with food-grade sugar. So we're looking to, I think in the future, we want to develop, so we're not using our food crops, but we want to use what Leo was saying, the cellulosic sugars. And then here we've got an example of platform chemicals. So this company is based in Oxford, and they have bugs that make acetone or butanol. And then from acetone or butanol, you can make all these other products. So for example, the butadiene down there, that's actually the major component of Lego blocks, so the plastic in Lego. And polypropylene, that's the plastic that we find for food containers, chopping boards, like a lot of stuff that we use, plastic, hardy plastic that we use these days, that's all made from polypropylene. So then we have a last case study to sort of sum everything up. So this is a MSW-based biorefinery, and the case study is Fiberite. So Fiberite is a company that sponsored my PhD and Leo's PhD as well. And what their aim is to take in MSW, then they pulp it and they recover the plastics and the metals and everything. And then you get this organic fraction, the biomass that's washed, you solubilize all the food waste, and you get a cellulose-rich fraction. And then the solubilized food waste, that goes to anaerobic digestion, to produce the methane, like what Alba was talking about. And then the cellulose-rich pulp, or the paper pulp that's in the waste, that goes to making sugars. And then that can go into a variety of different products. So I said at the start that we were going to ask you guys what you thought, whether we should do source segregation to leave it up to you, or should we do it at centralized facilities? So I know there's probably not a right answer, and it's probably a combination of both, but we just want to get a general opinion of what you think. So we've done a really good job because we've convinced you that centralized facilities are better.
So far,
for the moment, you should keep recycling. Don't start chucking everything in your bin. But I think we all agree that for a lot of things, we're going to get a lot higher recovery from doing it somewhere where it's centralized, because leaving up to the public is quite chancy, and people need to be educated and they need to be bothered as well. And it costs a lot of energy to drive around a truck to collect, this amount of food waste from everybody's house. So maybe we do it as part of towns, or at the end of your street you have a food waste bin or something. But again, it requires people to be proactive, and we don't know if that's going to happen. So I hope you can see how all the technologies that we've talked about fit into the idea of the circular economy, and that you've learned something today, if not for the car park last week or something like that. So thank you for listening, and if you have any questions, please ask.